the last area of this domain is around workload management and automation. And so we're just going to touch on that right now. Again, it's a policy-based outcome that we're looking to do. But the objective here is really saying, well, yes, I can right size, I can reserve infrastructure. But if I'm truly operating in this kind of pay-as-you-go world, variable demand, pay for stuff as I use it kind of model, then why would I have things switched on 24/7, right? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense if I'm not reserving it and I'm not using spot or something like that, then I'm paying for stuff that I don't need. And there are tools, third-party tools that may go and do some assessments of infrastructure and identify possible candidates. I think Park My Cloud was one in that space. But as ever, with all of these things, the business context is critical, right? Can I actually turn it off and just switch it back on again? Or is it a multi-tier, web and database application that you need to bring up the database before you bring up the web front end, or it won't work, or, right? I mean, there's all manner of, technical and business constraints around that. And we touched on patching and, alerting and monitoring and, security and antivirus and those kind of things. However, there are certain cases where it's absolutely applicable, and therefore you've got this schedule instance policy, which exists. I've just shown you the AWS one here, and we'll go and have a look at this in a minute. But this will enable us to specify a schedule for bringing up and switching off instances. And you can actually get quite complex in terms of the timing, the day of the week, the time that it comes up, the time that it's terminated, just by applying tags to those workloads. And so you can have some that come up on weekends that are needed, I don't know, for developers in at the weekend or in different regions. You can have a whole mix of different schedules, different stuff for dev and test or whatever it might be that you need here in order to provide that. But as the slide says, the consideration of that versus a reservation where, it eliminates the complexity of turning things off, and what if it's not available, and what if it doesn't come up, and how about patching and RIs and other things. Just a simple maths example here, right, in Azure. So for the region West US on a Linux instance, a D64, it's 64 CPUs, it's not small, but it's $3.58 an hour. Okay, it's going to cost me $1,500 to run that a year, but if I buy a 3-year reservation, that's going to cost me $983 for the month, right? And so when we look against a pay-as-you-go price, okay, for a 3-year reservation, it would have to be up 60% of the time, right? So the hours, 60% of the time for it to break even with that reservation. And so if we were looking at a 3-year reservation, it would have to be switched or up 38% of the time in order to break even. So when we're thinking about these workloads and scheduling, just doing a weekend is not going to break even on either of those constructs, even the 1-year RI. And this was a number I produced actually for one of our customers asking, because they were spending a ton of time invested in going around and having a conversation with their teams and departments and engineering managers about, well, what can you switch off? And there was a ton of excuses about why they couldn't, right? Yeah, they're complex workloads and applications that maybe you can't, or you're a global organization and these things are continually being accessed. And the point here is, yes, there are certain times where this is, of course, valuable, but many times the effort that you might spend trying to get this to work for applications, it may be easier to make sure that those are covered by reservations because of that kind of break-even point. But in simple terms, you can see that the maths potentially says the break-even point. When you're thinking about switching these off, or at least in the individual context, it may not be appropriate. But the devil is always in the detail, and it's always in the business context and the broader picture. And this is why we always encourage you to look at rate optimization, the commitments at the organizational level. Because if you're focused on small departments or workloads that are maybe switched on, switched off, or whatever, you're not going to buy a commitment But if you look at the bigger picture, you're going to be like, well, actually, as a total, we are running lots of those types of compute, and therefore, I can commit to, a certain threshold that you may get nowhere near if you're looking at a smaller granularity of your infrastructure. In the catalog, automation catalog, again, if you just search for the word schedule, I think you'll see the policies in there. We're not going to put this in place. There's no tagging in place on the resources you have, but I just wanted to kind of show you. You'll see a bit of information here around the schedule policy, but it doesn't really tell you anything about what the actual schedule is, right? And so this is really important, and a reason why you want to go and have a look at the actual policy in the GitHub repository. So that will take you into the docs. Mm-hmm. And actually, this is where the meat of the actual instructions are. Okay, so start and stop, 24-hour format, days of the week can be specified. The time zone is using, whichever Eastern time you want to use. So here's an example of the schedule, right? 8:15 till 5:30, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday through Friday. And there's the time zone. That will start at 8:15, stop at 5:30. That will only apply Monday through Friday, and it will be ET time zone. And so, the format is the schedule tag, and the value will be the schedule and the dates in that format. Okay, so you want to go take advantage of it. That's how the policy is being coded. Obviously, if the customer had already got something on a tag basis that was kind of articulating the schedule, you could go and change this policy to work with whatever format was there. But that's what we've got out of the box for recommendations here. The kind of README and the docs that exist on the repository are likely to have far more detail about how the policy works, what the specific actions are, or the specific permissions that are needed, and everything that takes place here, prerequisites. Of course, for switching things on and off are going to be some behaviors, right, to start and stop instances. So this would typically be much more permissions than you would have from a read-only point of view. Okay, so this is actually taking action in that cloud vendor space. So just be aware of that.